The dining hall at Riverside Community College buzzed with laughter and chatter as teachers filled the room for their annual appreciation dinner. It was that one night of the year when everyone could finally relax, forget about lesson plans and grading papers, and just enjoy themselves. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic bread drifted through the air, while soft jazz played from a speaker somewhere in the corner. Linda Chen moved quietly between the tables, her cleaning cart rolling softly across the polished floor. She wore her usual navy blue uniform, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. Most people didn't really notice her. After 15 years of working as a janitor at the college, she'd become part of the background like the walls or the furniture. She'd learned that being invisible had its advantages. No drama, no expectations, just honest work that paid the bills. She wiped down the last few tables near the stage, making sure everything looked perfect for the teachers. They deserved a nice evening. Many of them worked just as hard as she did, staying late to help struggling students or spending their own money on classroom supplies. Linda respected that about them, even if they rarely looked her way. "Can you believe they spent $12,000 on that thing and nobody even touches it?" A voice rang out across the hall. It was Mrs. Patterson, the music teacher, a woman in her late 50s with reading glasses that hung from a chain around her neck. She was pointing at the grand piano that sat on the small stage at the front of the hall. The piano was beautiful. There was no denying that. Its black surface gleamed under the lights, and Linda knew every inch of it because she dusted it 3 times a week. The school had bought it 2 years ago with some grant money, hoping to inspire students and create a culture of music appreciation. But it mostly just sat there looking expensive and lonely. "Such a waste," Mrs. Patterson continued, shaking her head. "Nobody appreciates real music anymore. It's all just noise on their phones." A few teachers nodded in agreement while others went back to their conversations. That's when Mr. Davis spoke up. He taught math and had a reputation for being clever but also a bit mean-spirited. The kind of person who thought sarcasm was the same thing as humor. "Well, we've got plenty of talent right here in this room," he said with a smirk, looking around. His eyes landed on Linda, who was pushing her cart toward the supply closet. "Hey, Linda! Come here for a second." Linda stopped, her hand still on the cart handle. She felt her stomach tighten. In 15 years, Mr. Davis had probably spoken directly to her maybe 5 times, and it was usually to complain about something not being cleaned properly. "Yes, sir," she said quietly, walking a bit closer but keeping a respectful distance. "You walk past that piano every single day, right?" Mr. Davis said, grinning at his colleagues. A few of them were already starting to smile, sensing where this was going. "Yes, I do," Linda replied. "Well, why don't you play something for us? Give us a little concert." He leaned back in his chair, clearly pleased with himself. "I'm sure you've picked up a thing or two just from being around it so much." Laughter rippled through the nearby tables. It wasn't cruel laughter exactly. More like the uncomfortable kind that happens when people aren't sure if something is funny or not. But they laugh anyway because everyone else is doing it. Linda stood there, feeling dozens of eyes on her. Her face felt hot and her hands instinctively gripped the fabric of her uniform. Mrs. Patterson had a tight smile on her face, the kind that didn't quite reach her eyes. A younger teacher looked down at her plate, clearly uncomfortable with the whole situation. "Come on, don't be shy," Mr. Davis pressed, waving his hand toward the piano. "Just play anything. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, maybe? That's an easy one." More laughter. Linda looked at the piano, that beautiful, lonely instrument that she'd been walking past for 2 years. The same piano she sometimes stood in front of during her late-night shifts when everyone had gone home. The piano whose keys she'd occasionally touched so gently, when she was absolutely certain no one could see her. Something shifted inside her chest. It wasn't anger exactly. It was more like a door creaking open after being locked for a very long time. She thought about her parents who'd given up everything to give her opportunities they never had. She thought about all those years in practice rooms, the blisters on her fingers, the competitions and performances. She thought about the hospital bills and the difficult choices and the dreams she'd carefully folded up and put away like old photographs. "All right," Linda heard herself say. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "I'll play something." Mr. Davis's eyebrows shot up. He clearly hadn't expected her to agree. "Wonderful. Everyone, we've got a show." Linda walked toward the stage, her shoes clicking softly against the floor. The conversations in the hall died down as people realized something was actually happening. She could feel their eyes following her, Some curious, some amused, some probably already feeling sorry for her. She climbed the 3 steps onto the stage and stood in front of the piano for a moment. Her reflection stared back at her from its polished surface. When was the last time she'd performed in front of people? 23 years? 24? It felt like a lifetime ago. It felt like yesterday. Linda sat down on the bench and adjusted it, moving it forward just slightly. The movement was automatic, muscle memory from thousands of hours spent at pianos just like this one. She placed her hands in her lap and took a slow, deep breath. In the audience, Mrs. Patterson leaned toward another teacher and whispered, "This is embarrassing. Someone should stop this," but nobody stopped it. They were all watching now, waiting to see what would happen. Some probably expected her to stumble through chopsticks or maybe not be able to play at all. Others might have thought she'd play something simple, and everyone could clap politely and move on with their evening. Linda closed her eyes. In her mind, she wasn't in a community college dining hall anymore. She was 17 years old, wearing a black concert dress, standing in the wings of Carnegie Hall while the announcer called her name. She could hear her mother's voice saying, "Let the music speak through you, not for you." She could feel her father squeezing her shoulder before she walked on stage. Her fingers lifted and hovered over the keys. The hall had gone completely quiet now. Even the people who'd been laughing a minute ago were silent, something in Linda's posture making them pause, and then she began to play. The first notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 filled the hall, powerful and clear and absolutely perfect. It was one of the most difficult pieces in the entire classical repertoire, the kind of music that separated talented players from true masters. Linda's fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. Her whole body moved with the music, swaying and bending as her hands traveled up and down the keyboard. The notes cascaded like water, each one crystal clear even as they came faster and faster. Mr. Davis's mouth fell open. Mrs. Patterson went completely pale, her hand clutching her chest. All around the room, teachers were frozen in shock, their forks halfway to their mouths, their conversations forgotten. This wasn't someone who'd picked up a few things from being around a piano. This was someone who'd devoted their entire life to music. This was a virtuoso. The music filled every corner of the hall, and as Linda's fingers moved across the keys, her mind drifted back to a time when everything was different. 25 years ago, she hadn't been Linda Chen, the janitor. She'd been Linda Chen, the prodigy, the girl everyone said was destined for greatness. It started when she was 4 years old. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan with almost nothing, working double shifts at a restaurant in Chinatown. They lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, and the constant rumble of washing machines was the soundtrack to Linda's childhood. One day, her mother brought home an old keyboard from a garage sale. It was missing a few keys and some of the sounds were off, but Linda was fascinated by it. Within weeks, she was picking out melodies she'd heard on the radio. Her parents noticed something unusual. Linda wasn't just playing notes. She understood music in a way that seemed impossible for someone so young. By the time she was 6, a music teacher at her elementary school called her parents in for a meeting. "Your daughter has a gift," the teacher told them, her eyes wide with excitement. "A real gift. She needs proper training." But proper training cost money, and her parents barely had enough to cover rent and groceries. Her father started working 3 jobs, sleeping only 4 hours a night. Her mother took on extra shifts and stopped buying anything for herself. They poured every spare dollar into piano lessons, competitions, and eventually, a real piano that they somehow squeezed into their cramped living room. Linda practiced 6 hours a day, sometimes more. While other kids were playing outside or watching cartoons, she was working through scales and arpeggios until her fingers ached. But she never complained. She saw how hard her parents worked, the exhaustion in their eyes, the way her father's hands trembled from fatigue. The piano became her way of honoring their sacrifice. By the time she was 12, she was winning national competitions. By 15, she'd caught the attention of instructors at Juilliard, one of the most prestigious music schools in the world. When the acceptance letter came, her mother cried for 3 days straight. Her father just held the letter and kept saying, "We did it. We actually did it." Juilliard was everything Linda had dreamed of and more. She was surrounded by talented musicians from around the world, studying under masters who'd performed in the greatest concert halls. The practice rooms were open 24 hours a day, and Linda often stayed until 2 or 3 in the morning. perfecting pieces that most people couldn't even begin to play. At 17, she gave her first major performance at Carnegie Hall. She wore a black dress her mother had saved for months to buy, and when she walked onto that stage and saw the sea of faces looking back at her, she felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The performance was perfect. The applause seemed to go on forever. Critics wrote glowing reviews. Her future seemed brighter than the stage lights, but life has a way of changing everything in an instant. It was a rainy Tuesday evening during her final year at Juilliard. Linda was in a practice room working on a Chopin piece when her phone rang. She almost didn't answer it. She was in the middle of a difficult passage and didn't want to break her concentration, but something made her pick up. The voice on the other end was a police officer. There had been an accident on the highway. A truck had lost control in the rain. Her parents had been driving back from visiting her aunt in New Jersey. They died instantly, the officer said, as if that was supposed to make it better somehow. Linda dropped the phone. She couldn't breathe. The practice room suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. Someone found her there hours later, sitting on the floor, staring at nothing. The funeral was a blur. Relatives she barely knew patted her shoulder and said things like, "They're in a better place," and "They were so proud of you." But Linda couldn't hear them. All she could hear was silence, the terrible silence of a world without her parents in it. Then came the bills. Her parents had been paying for Juilliard by taking out loans, lots of them. They'd also borrowed money from friends and family. Linda discovered she was over $100,000 in debt, and that didn't even include the regular student loans. She tried to keep going, tried to finish her degree, but she couldn't focus. Every time she sat at a piano, she thought about her father's tired eyes and her mother's worn hands. The music that had once brought her joy now only brought pain. She dropped out 3 months before graduation. Her instructors begged her to stay, told her she was throwing away her future, but Linda couldn't explain to them that her future had died on that rainy highway. She moved back to the tiny apartment where she'd grown up, got a job waitressing, and started trying to pay off the debt. That's when she met Thomas. He was a regular customer at the restaurant, always friendly, always left good tips. He asked her out, and Linda said yes because she was lonely and tired and needed someone to make her feel less lost. They got married 6 months later. It wasn't a grand love story, but it was comfortable, and comfortable seemed like enough. Then Linda got pregnant. When their daughter Amy was born, Linda felt something shift inside her. This tiny person depending on her gave her a reason to keep going. She got a better job working at a hospital in the administrative office, and Thomas worked in construction. They weren't rich, but they were managing. Amy was 3 years old when she got sick. At first, the doctors thought it was just a bad flu, but the fever wouldn't go away and Amy kept getting weaker. More tests, more doctors. Finally, the diagnosis that made Linda's world stop for the second time in her life. Childhood leukemia. The treatment was expensive, even with insurance. There were specialist appointments, medications, hospital stays that stretched for weeks. Linda took a second job working nights at a convenience store. Thomas worked overtime whenever he could, but it still wasn't enough. The medical bills kept piling up, turning into mountains of debt that seemed impossible to climb. Thomas started drinking. He'd come home late smelling like beer, and they'd fight in whispers so Amy wouldn't hear. He said he couldn't handle the stress, couldn't handle watching his daughter suffer. One morning, Linda woke up and he was gone, just gone. He left a note saying he was sorry, but sorry didn't pay the bills or sit with Amy during chemo treatments. For the next 8 years, Linda's life became a cycle of work, hospital, sleep, repeat. She took a job as a janitor at Riverside Community College because the hours were flexible and the benefits were decent. She picked up extra shifts whenever she could. She sold everything of value she owned, including her mother's jewelry. The piano she'd grown up with, the one her parents had sacrificed so much to buy, sat in storage. She couldn't bear to look at it. Music felt like it belonged to a different person, a different life, one that had nothing to do with hospital waiting rooms and past due notices. But Amy fought hard. She was braver than anyone Linda had ever known. And slowly, miraculously, she got better. The cancer went into remission. By the time Amy was 13, the doctor said she was clear. She'd made it. Amy was smart, determined, just like her mother had been. She worked hard in school, got scholarships, and went off to medical school. She wanted to help other kids like her, she said. Linda was so proud she could barely speak, but by then Linda had forgotten how to dream for herself. The debt was mostly paid off, but she was exhausted down to her bones. She was in her 40s, working as a janitor. And the girl who'd once performed at Carnegie Hall felt like a character from a book she'd read long ago. She'd walk past that piano at the college sometimes and remember. Just remember. But she never thought about playing again. That part of her life was over, until tonight when someone decided to make her a joke. Linda's fingers moved faster now, climbing up and down the keyboard with a speed that seemed impossible. The music swelled and crashed like ocean waves, each note crystal clear even as they came tumbling out one after another. Her eyes were still closed, but her hands knew exactly where to go. 25 years hadn't erased the muscle memory, hadn't dulled the instinct that separated her from everyone else who'd ever touched a piano. In the audience, Mr. Davis sat frozen, his face pale. The smug grin had disappeared completely. His hand gripped his water glass so tightly his knuckles had turned white. Next to him, Mrs. Patterson looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her mouth hung open, and tears were actually forming in her eyes. She'd taught music for 30 years, had heard countless performances, but nothing like this. Not here. Not from the woman who cleaned their classrooms. Around the hall, teachers were pulling out their phones. Some were recording. Others were frantically texting people. A younger teacher named Kevin had his phone up, streaming the whole thing live on social media. He didn't even think about it. He just knew that something extraordinary was happening, something people needed to see. The music built higher and higher. Linda's whole body swayed with the emotion of the piece, her shoulders rising and falling, her head tilting back. This wasn't just technical skill. This was someone pouring their entire soul into the music. Every bit of pain and loss and sacrifice finding its way into the notes. You could hear her broken dreams in the minor chords. You could hear her parents' love in the gentle passages. You could hear her daughter's fight for life in the triumphant crescendos. Mrs. Patterson pressed her hand to her chest. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. The Rachmaninoff Second Concerto wasn't just difficult. It was brutally, impossibly hard. Professional pianists spent months preparing it. Concert halls charged premium prices when someone performed it. And here was their janitor playing it from memory, with a depth of feeling that made Mrs. Patterson's own performances seem shallow by comparison. A few tables away, Jennifer, one of the English teachers, was openly crying. She didn't even know why exactly. She'd never particularly cared about classical music before, but something about watching Linda play, seeing the pure emotion on her face, the way the music seemed to flow through her rather than from her, it broke something open inside Jennifer's chest. Mr. Davis wanted to sink through the floor and disappear. What had he done? He'd meant it as a harmless joke, a bit of fun at someone else's expense. He'd never imagined, never even considered, that Linda might actually be able to play, and not just play but perform like this, like a master, like someone who devoted their entire life to music. The piece moved into a softer section and Linda's touch became gentle, almost delicate. Her fingers caressed the keys, drawing out notes that seemed to hang in the air like wisps of smoke. The hall was completely silent except for the music. People had stopped chewing. They'd stopped breathing. A few of the kitchen staff had come out to see what was happening, and they stood in the doorway, dish towels in their hands, transfixed. Linda's mind was somewhere else entirely. She was back in the practice rooms at Juilliard, young and full of hope. She was performing for her parents, seeing the pride in their eyes. She was sitting at Amy's hospital bedside, humming melodies to help her daughter sleep. She was remembering every moment that music had been stolen from her, and she was taking it all back right here, right now. The music began to build again, growing more intense, more powerful. Linda's hands flew across the keys in a blur. The runs were so fast they seemed to blend together into one continuous sound. Her left hand provided thundering bass notes while her right hand danced up in the higher registers. It was like watching someone paint a masterpiece in real time, except the canvas was sound and the paint was pure emotion. Mrs. Patterson leaned toward the principal. Dr. Williams, who was sitting at the head table with his own mouth hanging open. "That's conservatory level," Mrs. Patterson whispered, her voice shaking. "That's beyond conservatory level. Do you understand what we're seeing right now?" Dr. Williams just nodded slowly. He understood. For 15 years, a world-class musician had been emptying their trash cans and mopping their floors, and none of them had known. None of them had even looked at her long enough to wonder. Kevin's live stream was already going viral. His phone kept buzzing with notifications. Hundreds of people were watching, then thousands. Comments were flooding in from all over. Who is this woman? This is incredible. I'm literally crying right now. Someone recognized the piece and commented, "She's playing one of the hardest piano concertos ever written and making it look easy." The music reached its climax. Linda's entire body was engaged now, leaning into the powerful chords, her arms extending fully to reach the far ends of the keyboard. Sweat beaded on her forehead. Her eyes were squeezed shut so tightly that tears leaked out from the corners, but her fingers never faltered, not once. Not for a single note, and then suddenly it was over. The final chord rang out, powerful and triumphant, echoing through the hall. Linda's hands held the keys down, letting the sound fade naturally, slowly, until it disappeared into silence. For a moment, nobody moved. The silence stretched out and Linda kept her eyes closed, her hands still on the keys, not quite ready to return to reality, not quite ready to be a janitor again. Then the hall erupted. Teachers leaped to their feet, chairs scraping against the floor. The applause was deafening, echoing off the walls. People were shouting, cheering, some of them openly crying. Mrs. Patterson was on her feet, clapping so hard her hands hurt, tears streaming down her face. Dr. Williams stood with his hands above his head, clapping and shaking his head in disbelief. Jennifer was sobbing into her napkin. Kevin was still recording, his own hands shaking, trying to capture the standing ovation. The kitchen staff in the doorway were clapping and whistling. Even some of the students who'd been passing by in the hallway had crowded in to see what was happening. And they were cheering too, though they didn't fully understand what they'd just witnessed. Mr. Davis stood slowly, reluctantly, his face burning with shame. He clapped, but it was a hollow gesture. He knew what he'd done. He knew he'd tried to humiliate this woman, and instead she'd revealed herself to be extraordinary in a way he could never be. Linda finally opened her eyes. She looked out at the sea of faces, all of them on their feet, all of them applauding for her. The expression on her face was complicated. There was surprise, certainly, but also sadness and something that looked almost like relief, like a weight she'd been carrying for 25 years had finally been lifted. Mrs. Patterson practically ran to the stage, nearly tripping over her own feet in her hurry. She climbed the steps and Linda stood up from the piano bench, suddenly feeling exposed and vulnerable. Mrs. Patterson grabbed Linda's hands, her eyes wide and red from crying. "Who are you?" Mrs. Patterson asked, her voice barely above a whisper, though in the quieting applause it carried. "Where did you train? How long have you been playing?" Linda looked at her, then out at all the faces staring at her with new eyes. These were people she'd worked alongside for 15 years. People who'd walked past her without really seeing her. People who'd made small talk about the weather while she cleaned up their messes. And now they wanted to know who she was. She took a deep breath. "I studied at Juilliard," she said quietly. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "A long time ago, before life got complicated, Juilliard." Dr. Williams stepped forward, his voice full of shock. "You're a Juilliard musician and you've been working here as a janitor?" Linda nodded. "I needed a job with good health insurance. My daughter was sick for a long time. Music, it became something I couldn't afford to think about anymore." The room had gone quiet again. People were listening to every word, trying to understand how something like this was possible, how someone with this much talent could slip through the cracks and disappear into the background of ordinary life. Mrs. Patterson was still holding Linda's hands. "That was the Rachmaninoff's Second Concerto," she said, her voice breaking. "Do you know how difficult that piece is? I've been teaching music my whole life and I couldn't play that. Most concert pianists can't play that. My mother loved Rachmaninoff," Linda said softly. "She used to say his music could break your heart and put it back together again in the same moment." More tears from the audience. Jennifer was practically sobbing now. Even some of the men were wiping their eyes, trying to be discreet about it. Kevin's phone buzzed again. His live stream had reached 50,000 viewers and climbing. The comments were pouring in so fast he couldn't even read them all. The applause finally died down, but people couldn't stop staring at Linda. She stood there on the stage, still in her janitor's uniform, looking small and uncomfortable under their gaze. Mrs. Patterson guided her to sit back down on the piano bench, treating her like she was made of glass, like she might disappear if anyone moved too quickly. Dr. Williams cleared his throat and stepped closer to the stage. His mind was racing. For 15 years, this woman had been working in his school, and he'd never once had a real conversation with her. He'd seen her countless times, nodded hello in the hallways, but he'd never actually seen her. "Not really, Linda," he said, and his voice was thick with emotion. "I don't even know what to say. This is extraordinary. Would you? We have an opening in the music department. Mrs. Patterson has been asking for help for 2 years now. Would you consider teaching here? Properly, as a music instructor." The offer hung in the air. Around the room, teachers nodded eagerly. Of course she should teach. Someone with that kind of talent couldn't keep pushing a cleaning cart. It seemed obvious now, almost criminal, that she'd been doing anything else. But Linda's face showed something complicated. She looked down at her hands, at the calluses from years of scrubbing floors and carrying supplies. "I appreciate that," she said slowly. "I really do. But I haven't taught in over 20 years. I'm not sure I'd even know where to start." "You don't have to decide right now," Dr. Williams said quickly. "Just think about it, please." Linda nodded, but she looked overwhelmed. She stood up, wanting nothing more than to disappear back into her normal routine, to go back to being invisible. But Mrs. Patterson touched her arm gently. "Would you play something else?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Please. Just one more piece." Linda hesitated, then shook her head. "I should really get back to work. There's still cleaning to do." "The cleaning can wait," Dr. Williams said. "Please, Linda, if you want to, of course. No pressure." But it was pressure, wasn't it? All those eyes on her, all those phones recording. Linda felt trapped between two versions of herself. The one who'd given up music to survive, and the one who'd just spent 10 minutes remembering who she used to be. She sat back down at the piano. This time she chose something gentler, something that had gotten her through the hardest nights in the hospital with Amy. Clair de Lune by Debussy. The notes floated through the hall like moonlight, soft and haunting and impossibly beautiful. People swayed in their seats. Some closed their eyes. It was like being wrapped in a warm blanket made of sound. When she finished, the applause was different, quieter, more reverent. People were too moved to shout. They just clapped and wiped their eyes and wondered how they'd been so blind. Linda left the stage quickly after that, grabbing her cleaning cart and heading for the hallway. She needed air. She needed space. But Jennifer, the English teacher, caught up with her near the supply closet. "Linda, wait," Jennifer said, slightly out of breath. "I just wanted to say that was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry we never took the time to know you." "That's on us." Linda managed a small smile. "It's okay, really. People have their own lives and problems. I understand." "It's not okay," Jennifer insisted. "You've been here all this time and we walked right past you like you were invisible. That's not okay." Before Linda could respond, her phone rang. She pulled it from her pocket, surprised. Hardly anyone called her. The number was unfamiliar, but something made her answer. "Hello. Is this Linda Chen?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, who's calling?" "My name is Rebecca Torres. I'm a music director at the Berklee School of Music in Boston. I just saw a video of you performing Rachmaninoff. It's being shared all over social media right now. I had to track down your number through the community college directory. I hope that's okay." Linda's head spun. "A video? What video?" "Someone live-streamed your performance. It's already been viewed over 200,000 times, and that was just 10 minutes ago. Ms. Chen, your playing is extraordinary. I'd love to talk to you about some opportunities we might have." Linda leaned against the wall, suddenly dizzy. 200,000 people had watched her play? That couldn't be real. Things like that didn't happen to people like her. "I don't understand," Linda said weakly. "I know this must be overwhelming," Rebecca continued, her voice kind, "but I'd really love to set up a time to speak with you properly. Could we arrange a phone call tomorrow, perhaps? Here's my direct number." Linda fumbled for a pen, writing the number on her arm since she didn't have paper handy. She agreed to call the next day, then hung up, staring at her phone like it might explode. Her phone rang again, and then again. Over the next hour, while Linda tried unsuccessfully to finish her cleaning duties, she received calls from music schools, concert organizers, and even a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell her story. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with text messages and notifications. The video was spreading faster than wildfire. By the time Linda got home to her small apartment at midnight, she was exhausted and confused. She made herself tea and sat on her worn couch, finally opening her laptop to see what everyone was talking about. She typed her name into the search bar, and there it was. Videos of her performance from multiple angles. Articles were already being written. Janitor stuns crowd with piano performance. Hidden virtuoso discovered at community college. Woman's incredible performance goes viral. The comment section was overwhelming. Thousands of people had written messages. This made me cry. How is she not famous? This woman is a genius. I've listened to this 50 times already. People were sharing their own stories of giving up dreams, of hidden talents, of feeling invisible. Linda's phone rang again. This time it was a number she recognized, Amy, her daughter. Mom? Amy's voice came through and she was crying. Mom, I just saw the video. Everyone's sending it to me. Mom, I had no idea. Why didn't you tell me you were that good? Linda felt tears spring to her eyes. Baby, you were sick. Nothing else mattered except getting you better. The music didn't matter. Of course it mattered, Amy said, her voice breaking. Mom, you gave up everything for me. Your whole career, your dreams, everything. I knew you worked hard, but I didn't understand what you'd sacrificed. I'd do it again, Linda said firmly. 1,000 times over. You're healthy now. You're going to be a doctor and help other kids. That's worth more than any concert hall. But Mom, you can still play. You're still incredible. Did you see how many people are watching? You could perform again. You could teach. You could do something with this gift. Linda looked around her small apartment. The furniture was old, the carpet worn, but it was paid for. She had a steady job with benefits. She'd learned not to dream too big because dreams had a way of breaking your heart. I don't know, sweetheart, Linda said quietly. I'm 47 years old. That ship might have sailed. It hasn't sailed, Amy insisted. Mom, I'm a doctor now. I have a good job. I can help you. You spent 20 years taking care of me. Let me help you for once. After they hung up, Linda sat in the dark thinking. Her phone kept buzzing. More messages, more calls, more opportunities that seemed too good to be true. She thought about her parents, about how proud they'd been when she got into Juilliard. She thought about all those years of practice, all that talent that she'd locked away like an old photograph in a drawer. The next morning, Linda called in sick to work. She'd never called in sick before, not in 15 years. She sat at her kitchen table with coffee and started returning phone calls. First was Rebecca Torres from Berkeley. They talked for an hour. Rebecca wanted Linda to come give a guest lecture, maybe do a small performance for the students. No pressure, she said, but the door was open if Linda was interested. Then Linda called a concert hall in the city. They'd reached out about a benefit concert they were organizing for families dealing with medical debt. Would Linda consider performing? They couldn't pay much, but it would be for a good cause. Linda said yes before she could overthink it. Mrs. Patterson called around noon. Linda, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I wanted to reach out personally. That offer from Dr. Williams, it's real. We could really use someone like you in the music department. Even if it's just part-time to start. And I was thinking maybe we could co-teach. I could learn from you and you could ease back into teaching. What do you think? Linda surprised herself by saying she'd think about it seriously. A month ago, the idea would have seemed impossible. But something had shifted inside her last night. Playing again, feeling the music flow through her fingers, seeing people moved by something she'd created, it had awakened something she'd thought was dead. That afternoon, Linda drove to a storage facility across town. She hadn't been there in years. She opened Unit 47 and there it was, covered in a dusty tarp. Her old piano, the one her parents had bought all those years ago. She pulled off the tarp and ran her fingers over the keys. They were out of tune, but the sound still made her heart ache. She called a piano tuner. Then she called a moving company. The piano was coming home. 6 months had passed since that night in the dining hall, and Linda's life had changed in ways she never could have imagined. The piano from storage now sat in her living room, gleaming and perfectly tuned. She practiced every morning before work, her fingers slowly remembering everything they'd once known. She'd accepted Mrs. Patterson's offer to co-teach at the community college, starting with just 2 classes a week. At first, Linda had been terrified. Standing in front of students trying to explain music theory and technique felt impossible. But Mrs. Patterson had been patient and supportive, and slowly, Linda found her rhythm. The students loved her. They could tell she wasn't just teaching from a textbook. She was sharing something real, something that came from deep inside her. What surprised Linda most was how much she enjoyed it. Watching a student finally master a difficult passage, seeing their face light up when they understood a concept, it filled something in her that had been empty for so long. She wasn't just playing music anymore. She was passing it on, the way her teachers had passed it on to her. The viral video had opened doors Linda never expected to walk through again. She'd performed at 3 benefit concerts, raising money for families struggling with medical bills. Every time she sat at a piano in front of an audience, she thought about her parents and Amy and all the people who'd sacrificed so others could have a chance. The music meant something different now. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about giving back. Tonight was special, though. Tonight was the biggest concert she'd done since her Carnegie Hall performance 25 years ago. The Riverside Symphony Orchestra had invited her to be their featured soloist for their annual charity gala. The proceeds would go to families dealing with childhood illness, helping them pay for treatments and medications. When they'd asked her to perform, Linda had cried on the phone. This was exactly what she wanted to do with her music. Amy had flown in from Chicago, where she was finishing her residency. She sat in the front row, wearing the blue dress Linda had bought her for graduation. Next to her were some of Amy's former nurses from the hospital, the ones who'd sat with them during those endless chemo sessions. They'd all watched the viral video and insisted on coming to support Linda. Behind them sat her colleagues from the community college. Dr. Williams had bought a whole table of tickets. Mrs. Patterson was there with her husband, dabbing her eyes with a tissue before the performance had even started. Jennifer sat with a group of teachers, including Mr. Davis. He'd personally apologized to Linda 3 times in the past 6 months, and while Linda had forgiven him, she could tell he was still working on forgiving himself. Tonight he looked nervous, like he was the one about to perform. Backstage, Linda stood in her dressing room looking at herself in the mirror. She wore a simple black concert dress that Amy had helped her pick out. Her hair was done nicely, pulled back in an elegant style. She looked like a performer. She felt like a janitor pretending to be a performer. The imposter syndrome was still there, whispering that she didn't belong here, that she should be cleaning the concert hall instead of performing in it. There was a knock on the door. 5 minutes, Ms. Chen, someone called. Linda took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them together, trying to steady them. Then she looked up at the ceiling and spoke quietly, as if her parents could hear her. I hope I make you proud, she whispered. Another knock, and this time Amy peeked her head in. Mom, can I come in? Of course, baby. Amy came in and hugged her mother tightly. You're going to be amazing. You know that, right? I'm terrified, Linda admitted. Good, Amy said, smiling. That means you care. But Mom, you've already done the hard part. You survived. You raised me. You kept going when everything fell apart. Playing the piano? That's the easy part for you. Linda laughed, though her eyes were wet. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. Amy squeezed her mother's hand. Oh, I almost forgot. This came for you. She handed Linda a small envelope. Linda opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a simple card with just a few words written in shaky handwriting. Your mother would be so proud. Your father, too. Break a leg tonight. Love, Mrs. Wu. It was signed by her parents' old friend from Chinatown, someone Linda hadn't seen in years. Somehow she'd heard about the concert. The tears came then, and Amy gently wiped them away. You're going to mess up your makeup, she said softly. Come on, it's time. Linda walked to the stage entrance, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. The orchestra was already seated, tuning their instruments. The conductor, a kind woman named Margaret, smiled at her encouragingly. Ready? She asked. Linda nodded, not trusting her voice. The lights dimmed in the concert hall. The audience grew quiet. Margaret walked out first to applause, then gestured toward the wings. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our soloist for this evening, Linda Chen. Linda walked onto the stage and the applause swelled. She saw Amy in the front row clapping so hard, tears already streaming down her face. She saw her colleagues standing and cheering. She saw hundreds of faces, all of them looking at her with encouragement and support. She sat at the grand piano and adjusted the bench, just like she'd done thousands of times before. Margaret raised her baton and Linda placed her hands on the keys. They were playing Rachmaninoff's Second Piano Concerto, the same piece she'd performed that night in the dining hall. But this time it was with a full orchestra, the way it was meant to be played. The orchestra began the opening bars, and when Linda came in, it was like coming home. The fear melted away. There was only the music flowing through her and around her. The orchestra swelled behind her, strings and brass and percussion all working together to create something bigger than any of them alone. Linda's fingers danced across the keys, confident and sure. She played the gentle passages with tenderness, thinking of her mother's soft voice singing her to sleep. She played the powerful sections with strength, thinking of her father working 3 jobs without complaint. She played the sorrowful parts with honesty, not hiding from the pain she'd experienced. And she played the triumphant finale with pure joy, celebrating not just survival but the possibility of thriving again. The final chord rang out, and for a moment, the hall was completely silent. Then the entire audience was on their feet. The applause was thunderous. People were shouting and crying and clapping until their hands hurt. The orchestra members were tapping their bows against their music stands, the traditional way musicians show respect for a soloist. Margaret had tears running down her face. Linda stood and bowed, and the applause grew even louder. Amy was standing on her chair, not caring that it wasn't proper, clapping and cheering for her mother. Mrs. Patterson was sobbing into her husband's shoulder. Even Mr. Davis was on his feet, clapping hard, his face showing something like redemption. Linda bowed again, and the audience called for an encore. She looked at Margaret, who nodded enthusiastically. Linda sat back down at the piano. This time she played something simpler, something her mother used to play for her. A gentle Chinese folk song about the moon and home and belonging. The concert raised over $50,000 that night. But more than that, it raised awareness. News outlets picked up the story. More families reached out asking for help. Other musicians who'd given up their dreams contacted Linda, asking for advice, for hope, for permission to try again. 3 months after the concert, Linda made a decision. She quit her janitorial job. It was terrifying and liberating at the same time. She took a full-time teaching position at the college, and on weekends she performed at benefit concerts around the state. The money wasn't amazing, but it was enough. More importantly, she was doing what she loved, what she was meant to do. Amy called her every week, and they'd talk for hours about everything and nothing. "You sound happy, Mom," Amy said during one call. "I am," Linda realized. "I really am. Good, you deserve it. You've always deserved it." On a Tuesday afternoon, a year after that first viral performance, Linda was teaching a class when a student raised her hand. The girl was shy, probably 19, and she always sat in the back. "Ms. Chen, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. When you gave up music for all those years, did you think you'd ever play again?" Linda thought about it carefully. "No," she said honestly. "I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I'd missed my chance." "But you didn't," the student said. "You came back to it, I did. But here's the thing I learned. It's never really too late. Life doesn't always go the way we plan. Sometimes we have to set dreams aside for a while. Sometimes we have to make hard choices. But if something is truly part of who you are, it doesn't die. It just waits. And when you're ready, when the time is right, you can pick it back up again." The student nodded, looking thoughtful. Other students were listening carefully, and Linda could see her words landing somewhere deep inside them. After class, Linda walked through the hallways of the college. She passed the dining hall where it had all started, where someone had told her to play as a joke. She smiled, remembering how terrified she'd been, how close she'd come to refusing. Sometimes, she thought, the worst moments lead to the best changes. Sometimes being pushed to the edge is what finally gives you permission to jump. She had another concert next month, and 2 new students starting private lessons next week. Amy was coming home for Thanksgiving, and they were going to cook together and laugh, and maybe Linda would play while Amy sang off-key like she used to when she was little. Life wasn't perfect. Linda still worried about money sometimes. She still had moments of doubt. But she was living again, really living, not just surviving. And that made all the difference. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer just the janitor. She was Linda Chen, pianist, teacher, survivor, and most importantly, herself. Finally, completely herself.